24 years of mockery, a public humiliation disguised as law, and one grey-eyed cowboy who just shattered every rule by choosing the woman nobody wanted. Clara Whitmore spent her whole life being told she was too big, too plain, too broken to deserve anything beautiful. Then the frontier forced her into a bride lineup, like livestock at auction, and the one man who refused to play their game looked straight past her shame and said two words that changed everything: "I choose her." If you want to see how an invisible woman became untouchable, stay until the end and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from, so I can see how far the story travels. The day Clara Whitmore realized she'd never be loved started with flower dust and ended with public humiliation so sharp it carved itself into her bones. She was 14 years old. The annual Harvest Festival sewing competition had drawn seamstresses from 3 counties, and Clara, foolish, hopeful Clara, had spent 6 weeks crafting a dress that made her mother cry when she first saw it. Cream silk with hand-embroidered wildflowers climbing up the bodice, sleeves that caught the light like water. It was the most beautiful thing Clara had ever made, and she absolutely knew it would finally prove she was more than the clumsy, oversized girl who knocked over displays and split seams in every dress her mother tried to buy her. The competition took place in Black Hollow's town square under a merciless September sun. Clara stood beside her entry, hands trembling, while judges circled the tables. She saw them pause at her dress, saw them lean close. One of them, Mrs. Thornbury, the mayor's wife, lifted the sleeve between gloved fingers, studying the stitching. Clara's heart hammered so hard she thought she might faint. Then Mrs. Thornbury laughed. Not a polite chuckle, a full-throated, incredulous laugh that carried across the entire square. "Who made this?" she called out, still laughing. Clara raised her hand, cheeks already burning. Mrs. Thornbury's smile turned cruel. "You?" She looked Clara up and down, took in her broad shoulders, her thick waist, the way Clara's own dress strained at the seams. "Sweetheart, this is beautiful work, truly, but don't you think it's a bit ironic? A girl built like a plough horse trying to create something delicate?" The other judges tittered. Someone in the crowd snorted. "I mean, who would you even make this for?" Mrs. Thornbury continued, warming to her audience now. "You certainly couldn't wear it yourself. Can you imagine?" She held the dress up against Clara's body, and the contrast was so stark, the delicate silk against Clara's sturdy frame, that even people who'd been trying not to laugh finally gave in. Clara stood frozen while the entire town laughed at her. She didn't win, didn't place. The judges marked her entry as technically proficient but lacking authentic understanding of feminine grace, whatever the hell that meant. That night, Clara gathered every sketch she'd ever drawn, hundreds of them, years of dreaming in pencil and ink, and burned them in the yard behind her father's bakery. She watched the paper curl and blacken while her mother stood in the doorway wringing her hands, saying nothing, doing nothing, because that's what her mother always did. By morning, Clara had made a decision that would define the next 10 years of her life. She would never try to be beautiful again. She would be useful instead. She would be what everyone already told her she was, a workhorse, a pair of strong hands, a body built for labor, not love. She buried herself in the bakery and disappeared. 10 years later, on a July morning so hot the air shimmered like glass, Clara Whitmore woke at 4 a.m. to the sound of her father's cough rattling through the walls like stones in a bucket. She didn't bother checking on him. He'd been coughing like that for 3 years, and he'd made it clear he didn't want her hovering. What he wanted was bread. 20 loaves of wheat, 15 of rye, 2 dozen rolls, and 3 special orders for the Hendersons' anniversary party, all by noon. Clara splashed water on her face from the basin by her bed, tied her hair back with a strip of cloth, and headed downstairs in the dark. Her room was barely big enough for a cot and a trunk, tucked up under the eaves where the summer heat collected like a physical weight. Her 2 younger sisters shared the larger bedroom down the hall, the one with windows that actually opened and wallpaper that didn't peel. The bakery kitchen was already warm from the banked coals in the oven. Clara added wood, waited for the fire to catch, then hauled out the first sack of flour, 50 pounds. She hefted it onto the work table without much thought. She'd been doing this since she was 12. By the time the sun came up, she had 8 loaves already baking and was elbow deep in dough for the next batch. Sweat dripped down her spine. Her shoulders ached. Flour dusted her arms up to the elbows, ghostly white against her sun-browned skin. She heard her sisters moving around upstairs, light footsteps, laughter, the sound of water splashing in their wash basin. Margaret and Sophie, 17 and 19, pretty in that effortless way some girls manage, all dark curls and small waists and faces that made men stupid. They'd be down soon to work the front counter, wearing clean aprons and perfect smiles, while Clara stayed in back like something shameful. Her father came down at 6, still coughing, and barely glanced at her. "Hendersons want the order delivered by 11, he said. "Don't be late." "I won't. And don't talk to anyone. Just drop it and come straight back." Clara didn't bother responding to that. Her father had been giving her that same instruction since the sewing competition, as if she needed reminding that her presence was an embarrassment, that she was better off invisible. He poured himself coffee and stood by the back door, looking out at nothing. Abraham Whitmore had been a decent man once, or so Clara's mother claimed, before the debts piled up, before his brother cheated him out of half the business. Now he was just tired and mean, holding the bakery together with Clara's labor and his daughter's smiles. "Margaret and Sophie still sleeping?" he asked, though he clearly already knew the answer. "They'll be down soon," he grunted. "They need their rest. Unlike you, they actually bring in customers." Clara slapped another round of dough onto the table, harder than necessary. Her father shot her a look, but didn't say anything. He knew better than to push too far. Clara might be the invisible daughter, the shameful one, the one built like a plough horse, but she was also the only thing keeping his business alive. Margaret and Sophie finally drifted downstairs around 7 when the shop opened. They were already dressed, already glowing, already perfect. Margaret wore a blue dress with lace at the collar. Sophie had a yellow ribbon in her hair. "Morning, Clara," Sophie called, breezy and bright, as if they were friends instead of strangers who happened to share a last name. Clara grunted something that might have been a greeting and kept kneading. The sisters took their places behind the counter, and within minutes the shop filled with customers. Men mostly, young ones looking for an excuse to talk to Margaret, older ones who liked the way Sophie laughed at their jokes. They bought bread they didn't need and pastries they wouldn't eat, and Clara's father smiled like he'd built the whole business himself. Clara stayed in the back, sweating over the ovens, invisible as always. By 10:30 she had the Henderson order loaded into the delivery cart. 3 tiers of sweet rolls, 2 braided loaves, a dozen hand pies. She hauled the cart out through the back alley, avoiding the main street where people might see her and remember all the reasons they liked to laugh. The Hendersons lived on the far edge of town, which meant Clara had to cross the square. She tried to go early before the market crowd thickened, but she wasn't fast enough. By the time she reached the square, it was packed. Farmers selling produce, women buying fabric, children darting between carts. The noise was overwhelming. Clara kept her head down and pushed forward, trying to make herself as small as possible, which was impossible when you were broad-shouldered and pulling a cart loaded with bread. She was halfway across when someone's elbow caught the side of the cart. It wasn't hard, just a bump. But the cart was unbalanced and Clara was tired, and she'd been hauling heavy loads since before dawn. The wheel caught on a rut in the dirt and suddenly the whole thing tipped sideways. Bread hit the ground. Rolls scattered across the square like marbles. One of the braided loaves landed in a puddle. A hand pie got stepped on before Clara could even move. For a second there was silence, then someone laughed. Clara's stomach dropped. She knew that laugh. Everyone in Black Hollow knew that laugh. Shrill and delighted and mean. Judith Brennan, the blacksmith's wife who collected gossip like other women collected recipes. "Oh, good Lord," Judith called out, loud enough for the entire square to hear. "Clara Whitmore's done it again, clumsy as a drunk mule." More laughter. Clara dropped to her knees, scrambling to gather the bread, but her hands were shaking so badly she kept dropping things. Her face burned. Her throat felt like it was closing. "Don't cry. Don't you dare cry." "Someone help the poor girl before she breaks something else," another voice chimed in, and the laughter spread like wildfire. Clara grabbed for a roll, missed, grabbed again. Her vision blurred. She could hear people talking, feel them staring. But she couldn't make herself stand up, couldn't make herself do anything but kneel there in the dirt, gathering ruined bread, while the whole town watched her fall apart. Then a shadow fell over her. Enough. The voice was low, rough, absolutely cold. The laughter cut off like someone had thrown a blanket over it. Clara looked up. A man stood over her, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dusty range clothes and worn leather. His hat shadowed his face, but she could see his eyes, grey, hard as stone, a scar cut across his jaw, pale against sun-darkened skin. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the crowd, and whatever they saw in his expression made them shut up fast. "I said enough," the man repeated, and this time it wasn't a suggestion. Judith Brennan's mouth snapped shut. The other gossips suddenly found their shoes very interesting. Even the children stopped shouting. The man crouched beside Clara, moving slow and deliberate, and started gathering the bread. He didn't say anything, didn't ask if she was all right or tell her not to worry. He just picked up every piece, brushed off the dirt as best he could, and loaded it back into her cart. Clara stared at him, too stunned to move. When the cart was loaded again, he stood and offered her his hand. She took it without thinking. His grip was rough, calloused, strong enough that he pulled her to her feet like she weighed nothing. "You all right?" he asked quietly. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. The man studied her for a moment, something unreadable in his expression, then tipped his hat. "Name's Elias Mercer." "Clara," she managed. "Clara Whitmore." "Delivery cart?" He nodded at the cart. "Henderson Place, other side of town. Wheels bent. You'll never make it that far without it falling apart." He glanced at the crowd, which was still watching in silence, then back at her. "I'll walk with you, make sure it holds." "You don't have to." "I know." And that was it. No argument, no grand gesture. He just picked up the cart handles, tested the weight, then nodded for her to lead the way. They walked in silence through the square, past all the people who'd been laughing 30 seconds ago. Clara kept her eyes on the ground, but she could feel Elias beside her, solid, unbothered, like escorting a humiliated baker's daughter across town was the most normal thing in the world. The Hendersons lived in a neat white house with roses in the yard. Clara knocked on the door, handed over the order, and collected the payment without saying more than 3 words. Mrs. Henderson frowned at the state of the bread, dirt-smudged and battered, but she didn't complain, maybe because Elias was standing 10 feet away, looking like he could break the porch in half if he felt like it. When they were back on the street, Clara finally found her voice. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You didn't have to do that." Elias shrugged. "Crowd was out of line." "They always are." The words came out more bitter than she meant. He glanced at her, something sharp in his expression. "Always?" Clara looked away. "Forget it. Doesn't matter." "It matters." She didn't know what to say to that, didn't know what to do with the sudden fierce anger in his voice, anger on her behalf, which was something she'd never heard from anyone. They reached the bakery, and Clara took the cart handles back. Elias stepped away, putting space between them, and for a second she thought he'd just leave without another word. Instead, he said, "You ever need something, you come find me. I'm staying at the boarding house on Maple Street. Why would I need something?" "Don't know, but if you do." He tipped his hat again, and this time there was something almost like kindness in his eyes. "Take care of yourself, Clara Whitmore." Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd before she could even think of a response. Clara stood there for a long moment, cart handle still in her hands, trying to figure out what the hell had just happened. Nobody helped her. Nobody ever helped her. That was the rule. That was how things worked. Clara Whitmore was the girl you laughed at, the girl you ignored, the girl you used for labor and then forgot about. But Elias Mercer hadn't laughed, hadn't ignored her, hadn't looked at her like she was something broken. For the first time in 10 years, Clara felt something flicker to life in her chest. Not hope. She wasn't that foolish. But something. A crack in the armor she'd built around herself. A splinter of light in all that dark. She shook her head, shoved the cart into the alley, and went back to the ovens. There was bread to bake. That's all there was. That's all there ever was. August came, and with it a heat wave that turned Black Hollow into a furnace. Clara worked from before dawn until after dark, keeping the ovens fed, the bread baking, the orders filled. Her father grew meaner as the debts piled higher. Her sisters grew lazier, spending more time gossiping with customers than actually selling anything. And Clara kept her head down, kept her hands busy, kept herself invisible. She didn't see Elias Mercer again. Not that she was looking. She told herself she wasn't looking, but every time she crossed the square, her eyes scanned the crowd without meaning to. Every time the shop door opened, she glanced up. Every time she heard boots on the boardwalk outside, her heart jumped just a little. It was stupid. He was just some cowboy passing through, probably already gone. Probably didn't even remember her name. But then, late August, another scorching afternoon, her father came into the kitchen looking more sour than usual. "Judge Colton's holding an emergency meeting tonight," he announced. "Town hall. Says it's mandatory for all unmarried women and their families." Clara's hands stilled in the dough. "What for?" "Didn't say, but it's not optional." He shot her a look. "That includes you." Margaret squealed from the front room. "Oh, my lord, do you think it's about marriages? I heard they were bringing in settlers from out east." Sophie gasped. "We have to find something to wear. Clara, can you—" "She'll be fine in what she's got," their father cut in. "It's not like anyone's looking at her anyway." The words landed like a slap, but Clara didn't react. She'd had 10 years of practice not reacting. She finished the bread, cleaned the kitchen, and followed her family to the town hall as the sun set behind the hills. The building was packed. Every unmarried woman in Black Hollow and half the territory besides, all crammed into the benches with their families. The air was thick and hot and crackling with speculation. Judge Colton stood at the front, a big man with a grey beard and a voice like thunder. He waited until the room settled, then cleared his throat. "I'll get straight to it," he said. "The territorial governor has issued a new decree. We've got 50 incoming settlers arriving next week, men looking to stake claims and build homesteads. Good men, hard workers, but they need wives, families, stability." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Clara's stomach tightened. "The decree states that all unmarried women between the ages of 16 and 30 will present themselves for selection next Saturday in the town square. The settlers will choose their brides according to frontier law, and marriages will be conducted immediately." The murmur turned into an uproar. "You can't be serious. This is barbaric. What if we refuse?" Judge Colton held up a hand. "Refusal means forfeiting your family's land claim and being barred from territorial benefits. This isn't optional. It's law." Clara felt like she'd been punched in the chest. A bride auction. That's what this was. They were going to line up every unmarried woman in town like livestock and let strangers pick through them. Beside her, Margaret and Sophie were already whispering excitedly, planning their dresses, imagining their futures with handsome settlers. Their father looked grimly satisfied. 2 daughters married off meant 2 fewer mouths to feed. But Clara just sat there, frozen, while the world tilted sideways. Nobody would choose her. She knew that with absolute certainty. They'd parade her out in front of the whole town, and she'd stand there while every man passed her by, and everyone would see, again, exactly how unwanted she was. It would be the sewing competition all over again, except worse. Public. permanent. A humiliation she'd never escape. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Families arguing, women crying, men shouting about their rights. Clara slipped out the back door before anyone noticed and walked home alone through the dark. She didn't sleep that night. The next week was a nightmare. Margaret and Sophie spent every waking moment preparing, sewing new dresses, practicing their smiles, debating which hairstyles made them look most marriageable. Their father hired a seamstress to make sure they looked perfect. Nobody asked Clara what she wanted. Nobody suggested hiring a seamstress for her. On Thursday, she finally gave in and went to see Mrs. Ashford, the dressmaker, hoping to at least find something plain that would fit. Mrs. Ashford took one look at her and sighed, "Oh, Clara, honey, I don't know if I've got anything that'll work. I just need something simple." "It's not about simple, dear. It's about—" She gestured vaguely at Clara's body as if her size was something too awkward to name. "You're just so much bigger than my usual clients." Clara's face burned. "Can you try?" Mrs. Ashford pulled out measuring tape and started taking numbers, but every measurement came with a wince or a frown or a barely concealed grimace. Other women in the shop whispered to each other, shooting glances Clara's way. "Well," Mrs. Ashford finally said, putting the tape away, "I can try to let out one of my older patterns, but honestly, Clara, I think you'd be better off making something yourself. You used to sew, didn't you?" "Not anymore." "Shame. You were good at it." Mrs. Ashford's smile was pitying. "But really, dear, I wouldn't worry too much about the dress. It's not like any of the men are going to—" She stopped herself, but the damage was done. Clara left the shop without another word. She went home, pulled out the old sewing kit she'd shoved in the back of her closet years ago, spent 2 nights stitching together a shapeless grey dress that fit her body without drawing any attention to it. It was ugly. She knew it was ugly, but it didn't matter. None of it mattered. Saturday morning arrived with cloudless skies and brutal heat. Clara's family dressed like they were going to a wedding. Margaret wore pale pink. Sophie wore cream lace. Their father wore his best suit and looked almost proud. Clara wore grey. They walked to the square together, but the moment they arrived, her sisters peeled away to join the other women, all of them glowing, all of them hopeful, all of them standing in a perfect line like flowers waiting to be picked. Clara stood at the end, alone, hands clenched at her sides. The crowd was enormous. It felt like the entire territory had turned out to watch. Judge Colton stood on a raised platform, flanked by the territorial marshal and 2 clerks with marriage registries. Then the settlers rode in, 50 men on horseback, dust rising behind them like smoke. They dismounted and lined up opposite the women, and Clara's heart sank. They looked exactly like she'd feared. Young, confident, hungry for land and legacy, men who'd come here expecting to find pretty frontier wives to build their dreams with, not women like her. Judge Colton raised his hand. "Gentlemen, welcome to Black Hollow. As you can see, we've assembled our finest unmarried women for your consideration. Take your time, choose wisely. Once a choice is made, it's binding." The selection began. One by one, men stepped forward. One by one, women were chosen. Margaret went third. A tall man with a kind smile took her hand, and she practically floated off the line. Sophie went 7th. Within an hour, nearly every woman had been claimed. Clara stood motionless, watching her worst fear come true. Men walked past her without even slowing down. Some glanced at her and quickly looked away. Others didn't bother looking at all. The crowd watched, whispered. A few people snickered. Clara kept her eyes on the ground and tried to remember how to breathe. By the time the sun reached its peak, only 3 women remained. Clara, a nervous girl named Anne who couldn't have been more than 16, and Mrs. Holford, a widow in her 40s who everyone knew was only here because the judge had forced her, and 3 men. One of them was Elias Mercer. Clara's heart stopped. She hadn't seen him in the crowd, hadn't known he was one of the settlers, but there he was, standing off to the side with his hat pulled low, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Judge Colton gestured impatiently. Gentlemen, make your choices. The first man, older, greying, stepped forward and chose Mrs. Holford. She looked relieved. They left together without ceremony. The second man, barely 20, approached Anne. She took his hand with tears in her eyes. That left Clara and Elias. The square fell silent. Every eye turned toward them. Clara felt her face burn, her hands shake. This was it, the final humiliation. He'd refuse, and the judge would let her go, and everyone would remember forever that Clara Whitmore was the only woman in Black Hollow no man wanted. Judge Colton looked at Elias. Mr. Mercer, the law requires— I know what it requires, Elias said, his voice flat. Then make your choice. Elias didn't move for a long moment. Then he walked forward, slow and deliberate, and stopped directly in front of Clara. She couldn't look at him, couldn't lift her eyes past the dust on his boots. Look at me, he said quietly. She shook her head. Clara, look at me. Something in his voice made her obey. She raised her eyes and found him watching her with that same unreadable expression from the day in the square. Then he turned to face Judge Colton and the entire crowd. I choose her, Elias Mercer said, clear and certain. The square exploded. People gasped, whispered, laughed in disbelief. Clara's father stood up, face red, looking furious and panicked at the same time, losing the daughter who ran his entire bakery. But Elias ignored all of it. He held out his hand to Clara. Will you come with me? He asked softly. Clara stared at his hand like it was something dangerous, something that might disappear if she touched it. Why? She whispered. Because I'm asking. But She couldn't finish, couldn't say all the things she knew were true, that she was ugly, unwanted, wrong. You're what? Elias said, and his voice was gentle but firm. You're strong. You're capable. You survived this town treating you like dirt for years, and you're still standing. That's more than most people can say. Something cracked open inside Clara's chest, something that had been frozen for 10 years. She took his hand. The crowd's noise faded to background static. Judge Colton was saying something about signing registries, and Clara's father was shouting, and her sisters were staring in shock, but none of it mattered. Elias Mercer had chosen her, not because he had to, not because she was the only option left. He chose her, and for the first time in her life, Clara Whitmore let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she was worth choosing. The registry office was cramped and smelled like old paper and lamp oil. Clara stood beside Elias while Judge Colton's clerk scratched their names into the marriage book with ink that looked too thin, like it had been watered down to stretch the supply. Her hand shook when she signed. The pen left a blotch next to her name that looked like spilled blood. Elias signed without hesitation, his handwriting surprisingly neat for a man who looked like he'd spent his whole life outdoors. When he set the pen down, the clerk blotted the page and turned the book around. Witnessed and recorded, he said in a bored monotone. Congratulations, you're married. That was it. No ceremony, no vows. Just 2 signatures and a bored clerk who'd probably processed 20 marriages that day and didn't care about a single one. Clara felt numb, like she was watching this happen to someone else. Elias touched her elbow gently. We should go. She nodded, not trusting her voice. They walked out into the square where the crowd had mostly dispersed. The other new couples were celebrating with their families, posing for photographs, making plans. Clara's father was nowhere to be seen. Neither were her sisters. They'd left without saying goodbye. Elias must have noticed because his jaw tightened. He didn't comment on it though, just guided her toward a wagon, hitched at the edge of the square, old but well maintained, loaded with supplies and covered with canvas. That's everything I own, he said quietly. Wasn't planning on getting married today, so it's not much. I don't have anything, Clara said, just what I'm wearing. He looked at her for a moment, something sad flickering across his face. You don't have any belongings? Clothes? Personal things? She shook her head. My father probably already cleared out my room. Gave it to one of my sisters. Elias's expression went cold. Wait here. Where are you? But he was already walking away, heading back toward the center of town with purpose in every step. Clara stood beside the wagon, feeling exposed and ridiculous in her shapeless grey dress, while people passed by and stared. Some whispered, some looked away quickly, like her misfortune might be contagious. 15 minutes later, Elias returned carrying a brown paper package. Basic supplies, he said, handing it to her. Some fabric, thread, a few other things. You'll need something more practical than that dress once we get to the ranch. Clara took the package, throat tight. You didn't have to. I know. He helped her into the wagon seat, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. Ranch is about 3 hours north. We should get moving before it gets dark. The wagon lurched forward, and Clara gripped the edge of the seat to steady herself. Black Hollow fell away behind them, and she realized with a strange detachment that she might never see it again. She didn't feel sad about that. They rode in silence for the first hour. The landscape shifted from the flat scrubland around Black Hollow to rolling hills covered in dry grass and scattered oak trees. The sun beat down mercilessly, and Clara's dress stuck to her back with sweat. Elias kept his eyes on the road, his profile unreadable beneath his hat. He didn't try to make conversation, didn't ask her questions, didn't fill the silence with meaningless chatter. Clara was grateful for that. She didn't know what she'd say anyway. Finally, as they crested a hill and the road dipped down toward a narrow creek, Elias spoke. I should probably tell you some things, he said, about the ranch, about me. Clara waited. It's not much, he continued. 200 acres, most of it rough country. Got a house, small, needs work, barn solid. Creek runs through the property year-round, which is why I bought it. Land's good for cattle if you know what you're doing. He paused. I lost my wife 5 years ago. Winter outbreak. Half the territory got sick. She didn't make it. Clara's chest tightened. I'm sorry. Her name was Caroline. His voice was careful, controlled. We were married 3 years. She was... He stopped, seemed to reconsider whatever he'd been about to say. She was good, better than I deserved. Is that why you didn't want to choose anyone today? Clara asked quietly. Because you're still... I came here to buy cattle, Elias cut in. That's it. Didn't know about the selection law until I rode into town last night. Judge Colton told me if I didn't participate, they'd revoke my land claim and run me out of the territory. He glanced at her. So I didn't have much choice, but neither did you. Clara looked down at her hands. No, I didn't. I'm not going to pretend this is something it's not, Elias said bluntly. I don't know you, you don't know me. We're strangers who got trapped by a bad law, but we're stuck with each other now, so we might as well figure out how to make it work. It should have hurt, hearing it laid out so plainly. But Clara found it almost comforting. At least he was honest. At least he wasn't pretending to want her when everyone knew the truth. What do you want from me? She asked. Elias was quiet for a moment. Help with the ranch. Cooking, mending, the usual things. I'm not expecting... He cleared his throat. I'll give you your own room. I'm not going to force anything on you that you don't want. Clara felt something unknot in her chest. Okay. Okay, Elias echoed. Then almost as an afterthought, you can leave if you want. Once we get to the ranch, I won't stop you. But if you stay, I'll expect you to pull your weight. It's hard country out here. No room for anyone who can't handle the work. I can handle it, Clara said, and her voice came out stronger than she expected. I've been handling it my whole life. Elias looked at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. Yeah, he said quietly. I expect you have. They reached the ranch just as the sun started dropping toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that looked almost violent. The house sat in a shallow valley between two hills, backed up against a line of cottonwood trees. It was small, 1 story, rough timber, a porch that sagged slightly on one side. The barn was bigger, newer looking, with a corral attached. A few chickens scratched around in the yard, and Clara could hear cattle lowing somewhere beyond the nearest hill. It's not much to look at, Elias said as he pulled the wagon to a stop, but it's solid. Roof doesn't leak. Clara climbed down from the wagon, her legs stiff from the ride. The air smelled different here, cleaner, sharper, with a hint of sage and dust. The silence was overwhelming. No neighbors, no voices, just wind and grasshoppers and the distant sound of the creek. "Come on," Elias said. "I'll show you inside." The house was sparse but clean. One main room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a few shelves holding supplies. A doorway led to a small bedroom on one side and an even smaller room on the other, barely big enough for a cot. "That was going to be a nursery," Elias said, nodding toward the small room. His voice was carefully neutral. "Never got around to finishing it. You can have the main bedroom. I'll take the small one." "I can't take your room," Clara protested. "You're not. It was Caroline's room. I haven't slept in there since she died." He set her package of supplies on the table. "Use it or don't. Up to you." He walked back outside before she could respond, leaving Clara standing in the middle of the dim room, trying to figure out what she'd just agreed to. She heard him unhitching the wagon, talking quietly to the horses. After a moment, she followed him outside. Elias was hauling supplies into the barn, moving with efficient purpose. Clara watched for a moment, then started helping without asking. She could lift. She could carry. That's what she was good at. They worked in silence until everything was unloaded and the horses were settled. By then, the sun had set completely and the temperature was dropping fast. "You hungry?" Elias asked, wiping sweat off his forehead with his sleeve. Clara realized she hadn't eaten since breakfast. "Yes." "I'll make something. You should rest." "I can cook." "I'm sure you can, but you've had a long day." He started toward the house, then stopped and looked back at her. "Clara, I'm not your father. You don't have to prove yourself to me every damn minute. If you're tired, rest. If you're hungry, eat. If you need something, say so. Understood?" Clara stared at him, not sure how to respond to that. Elias sighed. "Just come inside. We'll figure the rest out as we go." Dinner was simple. Bread, cheese, dried meat. They ate at the table without talking much. Elias seemed lost in his own thoughts, and Clara was too exhausted to try making conversation. When they finished, Elias stood and gestured toward the bedroom. "There's blankets in the trunk, water basins on the dresser. If you need anything, just knock." "Thank you," Clara said quietly. He nodded and disappeared into the small room, closing the door behind him. Clara stood alone in the main room for a moment, then went into the bedroom and shut the door. The room was neat but clearly unused. Dust covered the dresser. The bed was made, but the quilt looked faded from sitting in the same position for years. A small window looked out toward the hills, now dark against the stars. Clara sat on the edge of the bed and finally let herself fall apart. She cried quietly, hands pressed over her mouth to muffle the sound. Cried for the life she'd left behind, even though it had been terrible. Cried for the future she couldn't imagine. Cried because a stranger had shown her more kindness in one day than her own family had in years, and she didn't know what to do with that. When the tears finally stopped, she washed her face in the basin, changed into the nightgown from the package Elias had bought, and crawled under the quilt. She expected to lie awake for hours. Instead, exhaustion dragged her under like a stone. The first week at the ranch was brutal. Clara woke before dawn every morning, old habits died hard, and found Elias already outside, feeding animals or mending fence or hauling water. She learned quickly that life here ran on a different schedule than the bakery. There was no front counter, no customers, no sisters pretending to work, just labor, constant, unending labor. Elias didn't coddle her. He showed her how to milk the cow, feed the chickens, collect eggs, haul water from the creek. He explained things once, clearly, then expected her to remember. When she made mistakes, and she made plenty, he corrected her without mockery, just matter-of-fact instruction. It was strange being treated like a competent adult instead of a clumsy burden. They settled into an uneasy rhythm. Elias worked the ranch. Clara handled the house, the garden, the smaller animals. They ate meals together but rarely talked beyond practical necessities. At night they retreated to their separate rooms. It wasn't comfortable exactly, but it wasn't cruel either. And after a lifetime of cruelty disguised as family, Clara found the simple absence of meanness almost peaceful. The second week, a storm rolled through the valley. Clara had never experienced weather like this. Wind that rattled the windows, rain that came down so hard it sounded like gravel hitting the roof. Thunder shook the walls. She was trying to secure the chicken coop when a gust of wind caught the door and slammed it into her shoulder, knocking her sideways. Pain shot down her arm, sharp enough to make her gasp. Elias appeared out of nowhere, rain plastering his hair to his head. "Get inside." "The chickens, I'll handle it. Go." Clara stumbled back to the house, cradling her shoulder. By the time Elias came in 20 minutes later, soaked to the bone, she'd managed to change into dry clothes and was trying to figure out if anything was broken. "Let me see," Elias said, shedding his wet coat. "It's fine." "Clara, let me see." She reluctantly moved her arm. Pain flared, but nothing felt broken, just bruised. Elias examined her shoulder with surprising gentleness, his hands careful and professional. "You'll have a hell of a bruise, but nothing's torn. You're lucky. I should have been more careful. Storm caught both of us off guard." He grabbed a towel and dried his face. "You did good out there. Most people would have run inside at the first crack of thunder." Clara blinked. Was that a compliment? Elias caught her expression and almost smiled. "What, you think I don't notice when someone pulls their weight? I'm not used to." She stopped, not sure how to finish. Used to what? Being thanked for working. Elias's expression darkened. "Your family really did a number on you, didn't they?" Clara looked away. "They weren't all bad." "Yeah? They come say goodbye before you left, send a letter asking how you're doing, give you any of your belongings?" The silence answered for her. Elias shook his head, something like anger simmering beneath his usual calm. "You deserved better than that. I was useful. That was enough." "No," Elias said sharply. "It wasn't." He stood, pacing toward the fireplace. "I don't know what they told you about yourself, Clara, but whatever it was horse shit. You're not a burden. You're not ugly. You're not whatever other garbage they shoved in your head. You're a person, and you deserve to be treated like one." Clara's throat closed. She couldn't speak, couldn't even look at him. Elias seemed to realize he'd said too much because he cleared his throat roughly. "Anyway, Storm's going to last a while. You should rest that shoulder." He disappeared into his room before Clara could form a response. She sat at the table for a long time, staring at the fire, trying to process what had just happened. Nobody had ever defended her like that. Nobody had ever been angry on her behalf. It felt wrong and right at the same time, like putting on clothes that fit after years of wearing things 2 sizes too small. 3 weeks in, Clara was gathering eggs when she noticed the barn door was open. She hadn't been inside yet. Elias used it for storage and equipment, and Clara had been focused on the house and garden. But curiosity got the better of her, so she poked her head inside. The barn was dim and cool, smelling of hay and leather. Tools hung neatly on the walls. Saddles rested on wooden stands. And in the back corner, covered with canvas, were several large shapes. Clara set the egg basket down and moved closer. She pulled back the canvas and froze. Underneath were bolts of fabric, beautiful fabric, wool, cotton, linen, even some silk. Colors she hadn't seen since before she'd burned all her sketches, patterns and textures that made her fingers itch. "Found those, did you?" Clara spun around. Elias stood in the doorway, backlit by the afternoon sun. "I'm sorry," Clara said quickly. "I wasn't snooping, It's fine." He walked over and stood beside her, looking down at the fabric. Those were Caroline's. She liked to sew, made all her own clothes. "I kept meaning to get rid of them, but..." He shrugged. "Never got around to it." Clara stared at the fabric. Her hands trembled. "You can use them," Elias said, "if you want. Seems a waste to just let them sit here." "I don't sew anymore." "Why not?" "I'm not..." She stopped, took a breath. I'm not good at it. Elias gave her a long look. That's not true. You don't know that. Yeah, I do. He crouched down and pulled something else from beneath the canvas. A small notebook. He handed it to her. Clara opened it with shaking hands. Inside were sketches. Dozens of them. Dress designs, detailed and beautiful, with notes about measurements and fabric types. I found that on you, Elias said quietly. Day of the selection. It fell out of your pocket when you got in the wagon. I was going to give it back, but you seemed... He paused. You seemed like you didn't want to talk about it. Clara's vision blurred. She'd forgotten about this notebook. She'd started it years after burning all her other sketches, unable to stop herself from drawing, even though she'd sworn she'd never design again. She'd kept it hidden in her apron pocket, sketching during stolen moments when no one was looking. These are good, Clara, Elias said. Really good. Better than anything I've seen in the stores in town. They laughed at me, Clara whispered. When I was 14, I entered a sewing competition and they laughed at me, said someone like me could never create beautiful things. They were wrong. No, they were wrong, Elias repeated, more firmly this time. And you know how I know, because talent doesn't care what you look like. Skill doesn't give a damn about your size. You're either good at something or you're not, and you're good at this. Clara closed the notebook, hands still shaking. I don't know if I can. You don't have to, but if you want to. He gestured at the fabric. It's there. He left her alone in the barn, and Clara stood there for a long time, holding the notebook, staring at fabric she'd thought she'd never touch again. That night, after Elias had gone to bed, Clara brought the notebook to the table and opened it under the lamplight. The sketches looked back at her. Years of dreaming in pencil and ink. Years of pretending she didn't want this when it was the only thing she'd ever really wanted. She picked up a pencil. Her hand hovered over a blank page. Then, slowly, she began to draw. A week later, Clara worked up the courage to carry one bolt of fabric into the house. Elias noticed but didn't comment, just gave her a small nod and went back to his coffee. Clara spread the fabric across the table, a sturdy brown cotton that would be perfect for work clothes. She didn't have a sewing machine, but she had needles and thread from the package Elias had bought her, and she knew how to hand stitch. She started with something simple, a shirt for Elias. His current ones were worn thin, and she'd noticed him mending them himself with uneven stitches. It took her 3 days, working in the evenings after the day's labor was done. Her fingers ached, her eyes strained in the lamplight, but slowly the pieces came together. When she finished, she left the shirt folded on Elias's chair without saying anything. The next morning he came out wearing it. Fits better than anything I've ever owned, he said, running a hand over the seams. Thank you. Clara felt her face heat. It's just a shirt. It's not just a shirt, he met her eyes. It's a good shirt, and you made it. Something cracked open a little wider in Clara's chest. After that, she started sewing more. Simple things at first, another shirt, an apron for herself, curtains for the kitchen window. Then more complex projects. A vest, a coat. Each piece came together easier than the last, her old skills returning like muscle memory. Elias never praised her effusively or made a big deal out of it, but he wore everything she made and he always thanked her, and somehow that was worth more than any blue ribbon or judge's approval. One evening in early October, Clara was working on a dress, the first dress she'd attempted since arriving at the ranch. It was for herself, something practical but nice, something that actually fit her body instead of trying to hide it. She was struggling with the neckline when Elias came in from evening chores. That for you? He asked, washing his hands in the basin. Yes. What's wrong with it? I can't get the proportions right. The collar keeps bunching. Elias came over and studied the fabric. What if you took it apart here and recut the angle? Clara blinked. You know sewing? Caroline taught me some basics, enough to mend my own clothes. He traced a line with his finger. See, if you cut it like this instead, the fabric won't pull. Clara followed his suggestion and the collar laid flat. "How did you know that?" she asked, amazed. Elias shrugged. "Just makes sense structurally. Same principle as building a fence. If the angle's wrong, everything buckles." They fell into an easy rhythm after that. Clara would work on projects in the evenings, and Elias would sit across from her, mending tack or sharpening tools, occasionally offering suggestions. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence. It felt domestic in a way Clara had never experienced. Not the hostile silence of her father's house, where every moment felt like walking on broken glass. This was different, peaceful, like they'd figured out how to exist in the same space without hurting each other. One night, Clara looked up from her sewing and found Elias watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What?" she asked. "Nothing." He looked back down at the bridle he was fixing. "Just you seem different than when you first got here." "Different how?" "Less like you're waiting for someone to yell at you." Clara set down her needle. "That's what it felt like, for years, like I was always bracing for the next insult." "Your family did that to you." "My father," Clara corrected quietly. "My mother mostly just went along with it, and my sisters didn't really notice. They were too busy being pretty and adored." Elias's jaw tightened. "That's not an excuse." "I know, but..." Clara hesitated. "I don't think they meant to be cruel. They just never saw me as someone worth defending." "That's worse," Elias said flatly. "Cruelty you can fight against. Indifference just eats away at you." Clara looked at him, really looked at him. "Is that what it was like after Caroline died?" Elias was quiet for a long moment. People didn't know what to say, so they said nothing, avoided me, like grief was contagious. After a while, I stopped going into town. Easier to be alone than to deal with everyone pretending I didn't exist. "I'm sorry," Clara said softly. "Not your fault." He picked up the bridle again. "But that's why I didn't want to choose anyone at the selection. Wasn't planning on letting anyone close again. Seemed safer." "Then why did you choose me?" Elias didn't answer right away. He set down the bridle and looked at her directly. "Because you look like I felt. Like the world had beaten you down so many times you'd stop fighting back. And I thought..." He paused. "I thought maybe we could stop being invisible together." Clara's throat tightened. "I didn't think anyone noticed that I was invisible." "I noticed." His voice was quiet but firm. "That day in the square when everyone was laughing, I saw how you held yourself together, how you kept going even when they tried to break you. That takes strength most people don't have." "I didn't feel strong. You were. You are." Elias stood, stretching his shoulders. "Anyway, I'm turning in. Don't stay up too late." He disappeared into his room, leaving Clara sitting at the table, holding fabric she wasn't seeing anymore. Something had shifted between them, something subtle but undeniable. They weren't strangers anymore. They weren't just two people trapped by a bad law, making the best of it. They were becoming something else, something Clara didn't have a name for yet, but it felt like the opposite of invisible. It felt like being seen. Winter came early that year, rolling down from the mountains with teeth bared and no mercy. The first snow hit in late October, turning the valley white overnight, and trapping Clara and Elias in a routine that ran from dark to dark, with barely enough daylight in between to get everything done. Clara learned what frontier winters really meant. It wasn't just cold, it was brutal, relentless work, breaking ice on the water troughs every morning, hauling feed to cattle that couldn't graze through 3 feet of snow, keeping the fire going constantly because if it died, the house would turn into a frozen box within hours. Her hands cracked and bled from the cold. Her back ached from shoveling snow off the porch so they could actually open the door. She wore 3 layers of clothing and still shivered, but she didn't complain. Elias worked twice as hard as she did, up before dawn and out in weather that could kill a man if he wasn't careful. He came in some nights so cold his fingers wouldn't bend, and Clara would heat water for him to thaw them while he sat rigid in the chair, jaw clenched against the pain. "You should stay inside tomorrow," Clara said one particularly vicious night, wrapping his hands in warm cloth. "Let the cattle fend for themselves for one day." "Can't. Lost 2 head last winter because I waited too long to bring them down from the high pasture." His voice was rough with exhaustion. "Can't afford to lose any more." "You can't afford to freeze to death either." "I'll be fine." "Elias, I'll be fine," he repeated, more gently this time. "But I appreciate the concern." Clara wanted to argue, but she'd learned that Elias was stubborn in a quiet way that made arguing pointless. Once he decided something needed doing, he did it. End of discussion. She settled for making sure he ate properly and had dry clothes ready when he came in from the cold. It wasn't much, but it was what she could control. The sewing helped keep her sane during the long, dark evenings. She'd moved beyond simple repairs and was creating actual garments now, proper dresses with shaped bodices and fitted sleeves. She worked by lamplight while Elias sat across from her, and sometimes they'd talk and sometimes they wouldn't, but the silence between them had become something comfortable instead of awkward. One night in early November, Clara was working on a dress she'd been thinking about for weeks. Dark green wool with practical pockets and a split skirt that would allow for easier movement. She was trying to figure out the best way to reinforce the seams when Elias spoke up. "You ever think about selling those?" Clara's hands stilled. "Selling what?" "The dresses, the clothes you make." He nodded at her work. "That's better quality than anything in the general store. Hell, it's better than most of what comes from back east." "Nobody would buy anything I made." "Why not?" "Because," Clara struggled to find words, "because they know who I am, what I am." Elias frowned. "What you are is a seamstress, a damn good one. I'm the ugly daughter from the bakery that nobody wanted. They laughed at my sewing once. They'd laugh again. That was 10 years ago. You were a kid, and from what you've told me, that competition was rigged anyway. Bunch of rich women protecting their own." He leaned forward. "Clara, you're not that girl anymore. You're not in Black Hollow. You're here and you're good at this, and there's women out here who need decent clothes that actually fit frontier life." "I don't know." "Think about it," Elias said. "That's all I'm asking. Just think about it." Clara went back to her sewing, but his words stuck with her. She'd been so focused on surviving, on proving she could handle ranch life, that she hadn't considered there might be something beyond that, something that was hers. A week later, a neighbor stopped by. Clara had barely seen anyone since arriving at the ranch. Elias had mentioned a few families scattered throughout the valley, but they were all miles apart, and winter made visiting nearly impossible. So when a wagon pulled up outside on a grey afternoon, Clara's first instinct was panic. Elias was out checking the cattle. She was alone. A woman climbed down from the wagon, middle-aged, sturdy-looking, wrapped in a coat that had seen better days. She knocked on the door and Clara opened it cautiously. "You must be Clara," the woman said. "I'm Ruth Hadley. Live about 6 miles south. Been meaning to come by and introduce myself, but the weather's been, well, you know." She held up a basket. "Brought some preserves. Welcome to the valley." Clara took the basket, too surprised to do much else. "Thank you. Thank you. Can I come in? Just for a minute. Won't take much of your time." Clara stepped aside, and Ruth came in, bringing cold air and the smell of wood smoke with her. She looked around the house, taking in the curtains Clara had made, the mended furniture, the general air of someone actually living here instead of just existing. "Place looks good," Ruth said. "Elias let it go to hell after Caroline died. Nice to see it has life in it again. I'm just trying to keep up with things." "Don't sell yourself short." Ruth's eyes landed on the dress Clara had been working on, draped over the back of a chair. She moved closer, examining it. "Did you make this?" Clara nodded. Ruth ran her fingers over the seams, checked the stitching, held it up to the light. "This is professional work. Where'd you learn to sew like this?" "Just picked it up over the years." Well, you picked up something valuable. Ruth set the dress down carefully. I don't suppose you do commissions? I've been looking for someone who can make a decent work dress. Everything in the stores falls apart after 2 washings. Clara's mouth went dry. I've never sold anything before. That's all right. I'm not picky about business experience. I'm picky about quality, and you've clearly got that. Ruth named a price that made Clara's head spin. I need 3 dresses, sturdy fabric, nothing fancy, but I want them to actually fit. God knows I'm not built like those tiny women in the catalogs. Clara thought of her own struggles finding clothes that fit. Thought of all the women out here working ranches and homesteads, all of them dealing with the same problem. Maybe Elias was right. Maybe there was something here. I can do that, Clara heard herself say. Good, Ruth smiled. I'll bring fabric next week. You just tell me what you need for measurements. After Ruth left, Clara stood in the middle of the room, holding the basket of preserves, trying to process what had just happened. Her first commission, her first customer, someone who wanted to pay her for her work. When Elias came in that evening, half frozen and exhausted, Clara told him about Ruth's visit. He listened, then smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. Told you you're good at this. It's just one order. It's a start. He pulled off his gloves, wincing as his hands thawed. You do good work for Ruth, she'll tell others. That's how it works out here. Word of mouth matters. Clara made Ruth's dresses over the next 2 weeks, working carefully, double-checking every seam, making sure each piece was perfect. When Ruth came to pick them up, she tried one on immediately and let out a noise of pure satisfaction. Finally, she said, a dress that doesn't cut me in half at the waist. Clara, you're a miracle worker. It's just... Don't you dare say it's just a dress, Ruth interrupted. It's not. It's the first thing I've worn in 5 years that doesn't make me feel like I'm stuffed into a sausage casing. She paid Clara in cash. Real money, more than Clara had ever held at once. I'm telling everyone about you, fair warning. Ruth wasn't kidding. Within a month, 3 more women had shown up at the ranch, asking for dresses. Then 5, then 10. Clara worked late into the nights, sewing by lamplight, her fingers moving with the muscle memory of all those years she tried to forget. Each dress was different, tailored to the woman who'd wear it, designed for real work instead of sitting pretty in a parlor. The money started adding up. Not a fortune, but enough that Clara opened a jar on the kitchen shelf and started putting coins in it. Her money, earned by her own hands. It felt impossible. It felt real. Elias started bringing home fabric from town whenever he went in for supplies. Woman at the dry goods store says you need more brown wool, he'd say, setting bolts on the table. And someone asked about canvas for work aprons. You don't have to. I know. But you're building something here, Clara. Might as well help it grow. Christmas came quietly. They didn't have much. Frontier life didn't leave room for luxury. But Clara made Elias a proper winter coat with a lining she'd carefully pieced together, and he gave her a set of good sewing shears he'd ordered special from a catalogue. They're German steel, he said as she unwrapped them. Best you can get. Figure you've earned them. Clara held the shears, feeling their weight, their balance. They must have cost a month's worth of supplies. Elias, this is too much. No, it's not. He looked uncomfortable, like he always did when emotions came up. You work hard. You should have proper tools. They ate a simple dinner. Roast chicken, potatoes, the last of Ruth's preserves. Afterward, they sat by the fire, and for the first time since Clara had arrived at the ranch, the silence felt full instead of empty. I was thinking, Elias said eventually, spring's going to be busy. Calving season, planting, all of it. And if you're going to keep taking commissions, you'll need more space than the kitchen table. Clara looked at him. What are you saying? There's that old storage room off the side of the house. Hasn't been used in years, but it's got good light from the south window, and it's big enough for a proper sewing area. He poked at the fire. I could clear it out, build you a work table, give you somewhere to spread out. Clara's throat tightened. You'd do that? Why wouldn't I? Because... She struggled for words. Because this is your house, your ranch. You're my wife, Elias said quietly, and you're building a business. That matters. You matter. The words hit Clara harder than she expected. She'd spent so much of her life being told she didn't matter, being treated like furniture that happened to be useful, that hearing the opposite felt almost dangerous. Thank you, she managed. Elias nodded and went back to watching the fire, but something had shifted again. Another wall had come down. Another piece of the careful distance they'd been maintaining had crumbled away. January was vicious. Temperatures dropped so low that water froze solid within minutes of being carried inside. Elias spent days digging paths through snowdrifts taller than Clara's head. They lost 3 chickens to a fox that got desperate enough to try the coop. Clara's commission work slowed. Nobody wanted to travel in weather like this. But she kept sewing anyway, made Elias new shirts, made herself a proper winter dress, started planning more complex designs for when spring came. One afternoon, she was working in the storage room. Elias had cleared it like he'd promised, built her a solid work table, even added extra shelves, when she heard something crash in the main room. She ran out and found Elias on the floor, halfway between the door and the fireplace. Elias. She dropped to her knees beside him. His face was grey, his breathing shallow. What happened? Nothing, just slipped. But his voice was wrong, weak. Clara pressed her hand to his forehead and yanked it back. He was burning up. How long have you been sick? I'm not. Don't lie to me. How long? Elias closed his eyes. Couple days, thought it was just a cold. Clara's heart hammered. She'd seen this before, fever that came on slow, then hit hard. Half the territory had died from winter sickness 5 years ago, including Caroline. Can you stand? Yeah. But when he tried, his legs buckled. Clara got under his shoulder and hauled him upright through sheer force of will. She was strong enough to lift flour sacks. She could handle one stubborn cowboy. She got him into his bed, piled blankets on him even though he was already sweating, then ran to get water and cloths. For the next 3 days, Clara barely left his side. The fever got worse before it got better. Elias shook so hard the bed frame rattled. He muttered in his sleep words Clara couldn't make out. Sometimes he'd wake up and not know where he was, and Clara would have to talk him back to reality. I'm here, she'd say, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead. You're home. You're safe. Caroline, he mumbled once, eyes unfocused. Clara's chest tightened. No, it's Clara. Clara. He tried to focus on her. You need to, if I don't make it. You're going to make it. If I don't, the ranch is yours. Papers are in the trunk. Everything's... He coughed, the sound rattling in his chest. Stop talking, Clara said sharply, even though fear clawed at her throat. Save your strength. She made him drink water even when he fought her, made him eat broth even though he said he couldn't keep anything down, changed his sweat-soaked sheets and clothes and washed them in the creek even though her hands cracked and bled from the cold. On the 3rd night, his fever broke. Clara was dozing in the chair beside his bed when she heard him speak. Clara? She jerked awake. What? What do you need? Nothing, just... He looked at her, really looked at her. His eyes were clear for the first time in days. You stayed. Of course I stayed. Where else would I go? Caroline's family didn't stay. When the fever hit, they left town, took everyone who could travel with them, said it wasn't worth the risk. His voice was hoarse. She died alone except for me. Clara's heart cracked. I'm not leaving, not for a fever, not for anything. Elias reached for her hand, his grip weak but steady. I know. That's what... He stopped, seemed to reconsider. Thank you. You do the same for me. Yeah, I would. They sat like that for a while, Clara's hand in his, neither of them saying anything that needed saying. By morning, Elias was weak but recovering. By the end of the week, he was back on his feet, though Clara made him promise not to push too hard. I mean it, she said sternly. If you collapse again, I'm tying you to that bed. Elias almost smiled. You're terrifying when you're worried. Good, remember that. Something had changed between them during those 3 days. The careful boundaries they'd maintained, the polite distance, all of it had burned away with the fever. What was left felt rawer, more honest. They'd stopped pretending they were just business partners trapped by circumstance. February brought a thaw, and with it came more customers. Women Clara had never met started showing up at the ranch, all of them with the same story. They'd heard about the seamstress who made clothes that actually fit, and they needed dresses, aprons, shirts for their husbands, anything Clara was willing to make. Clara worked harder than she'd ever worked in the bakery, but this time it felt different. This wasn't labor she gave because she had no choice. This was work she'd chosen, work that mattered. One afternoon, while she was pinning a pattern, Elias came in from repairing fence and just stood in the doorway of her sewing room watching. "What?" Clara asked without looking up. "Nothing, just you look different when you're working on something you actually care about." Clara paused. "Different how?" "Happy," Elias said simply. "You look happy." Clara thought about that. Happiness had never been something she'd allowed herself to aim for. Survival had been the goal, getting through each day without being mocked or hurt or reminded of all the ways she wasn't enough. But here, in the small room with fabric scattered everywhere and orders stacking up, and a business that was actually hers, maybe Elias was right. Maybe this was what happy felt like. "Yeah," she said quietly, "I think I am." March came in like a lion, all wind and rain and mud that turned the valley into a swamp. Clara's commission list grew longer. She hired Ruth to help with some of the simpler sewing, straight seams, hemming, basic repairs, just to keep up with demand. "You're going to need a real shop eventually," Ruth said one day while they worked. "Can't keep running this out of your house." "I don't know about that." "I do. You've got something special here, Clara. Women talk, words spreading beyond the valley. I heard someone from 3 counties over asking about you." Clara tried to imagine that, an actual shop, a real business, her name on a sign. It seemed impossible, too big, too much. But then she thought about the girl in Black Hollow, who'd been told she was too ugly to create beauty, the girl who'd buried her dreams because everyone convinced her she wasn't worthy of them. That girl was gone now. In her place was a woman who'd survived winter, nursed her husband through fever, built a business from nothing, and learned what it meant to be seen instead of invisible. Maybe impossible wasn't impossible after all. One evening in late March, Clara was working late in her sewing room when Elias knocked on the door frame. "Getting late," he said. "You should rest." "Just finishing this hem, Clara." He came closer. "You've been working since dawn. You're going to wear yourself out." "I'm fine." "You're exhausted." He gently took the fabric from her hands and set it aside. "Come on, dinner first, then sleep." Clara wanted to argue, but she was too tired. She let Elias guide her to the kitchen where he'd already set out food, bread, cheese, leftover stew from lunch. They ate in comfortable silence the way they always did now. No tension, no awkwardness. Just 2 people sharing a meal at the end of a long day. "I was thinking," Elias said after a while, "summer's coming. Things will slow down on the ranch a bit, and your business is growing. Maybe it's time to—" He hesitated. "Maybe we should go into Black Hollow, show people what you've built." Clara's stomach dropped. "No, Clara, I'm not going back there. I can't." "You can," Elias said firmly. "You're not the same person who left. You've got a business, you've got skills people need, and you've got me standing next to you. They'll laugh like they always did. Let them try." There was steel in his voice. "I'd like to see someone laugh at my wife and get away with it." Clara looked at him, really looked at him. Somewhere along the way, Elias Mercer had stopped being a stranger who'd chosen her out of legal obligation. He'd become her partner, her ally, the person who stood between her and the world's cruelty without being asked. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "That's all I'm asking." But they both knew she'd already made up her mind. Spring exploded across the valley in shades of green Clara hadn't known existed. The ranch came alive with new calves, new growth, new possibilities. Clara's sewing room overflowed with orders, and she worked through each one with care, knowing that every stitch was proof she'd been right to hope. One warm April evening, she was sitting on the porch watching the sunset when Elias came out and sat beside her. "Penny for your thoughts," he said. Clara smiled, just thinking about how different everything is from a year ago. Different good or different bad. Different, she paused. Different like I didn't know life could be like this. Quiet, peaceful, mine. Elias was quiet for a moment. "You deserve it, all of it. The business, the respect, He stopped. "The what?" He looked at her, and something in his expression made Clara's breath catch. The chance to be happy. To be seen as who you actually are, instead of who people decided you should be. "You see me," Clara said softly. "You always have." "Yeah," Elias said. "I do." The silence stretched between them, full of things neither was ready to say out loud. But Clara felt it anyway. The shift, the pull, the way her heart beat faster when he was close. They weren't strangers anymore. They weren't even just partners. They were something more, something that had grown slowly, carefully, in the spaces between hard work and quiet evenings, and learning to trust that maybe, just maybe, they could have more than survival. Elias stood first, breaking the moment. "I should check the horses before bed. Elias." He paused, looking back at her. Clara wanted to say something, wanted to name this thing growing between them, but the words wouldn't come, so she just smiled. "Thank you for everything." He held her gaze for a long moment. "You don't have to thank me, Clara, not for this." Then he walked off toward the barn, leaving Clara on the porch with her heart hammering and the stars coming out overhead, and the sudden, terrifying knowledge that somewhere between winter and spring she'd fallen in love with Elias Mercer, and she had no idea if he felt the same way. The next morning, Clara woke to find Elias already gone. Not unusual, he was always up before dawn, but when she came into the kitchen, there was coffee waiting and a note scrawled on a scrap of paper. "Had to ride to the north pasture, back by afternoon. Don't work too hard." Clara smiled despite herself. She folded the note and tucked it in her apron pocket, then poured coffee and started her day. She had 3 orders to finish by the end of the week, including a wedding dress for a young woman from 2 valleys over. The bride had traveled 6 hours just to commission it, saying she'd heard Clara was the only seamstress who could make something beautiful that wouldn't fall apart after one wearing. Clara worked through the morning, her hands moving with practiced ease. The wedding dress was cream-colored linen, with subtle embroidery along the cuffs and neckline. Nothing ostentatious, but elegant in its simplicity. The kind of dress a frontier woman could actually wear more than once. She was pinning the hem when she heard horses outside. Not Elias, too many horses. Clara set down her work and went to the window. 3 riders were dismounting in the yard. No, 4. She recognized one of them immediately, and her stomach turned to ice. Her father. Abraham Whitmore looked older than she remembered, grayer, thinner, but his expression was the same, hard and entitled and angry. Clara's first instinct was to hide, to disappear into her sewing room and pretend she wasn't home. But she'd spent too many months learning not to disappear. So she took a breath, straightened her shoulders, and walked to the door. She opened it before they could knock. "Clara." Her father's voice was flat, no greeting, no warmth, just her name like an accusation. "Father." She didn't move from the doorway. "What are you doing here?" "We need to talk." "About what?" "About you coming home." Clara's hands tightened on the doorframe. "I am home." "Don't be ridiculous. He gestured dismissively at the ranch. "This isn't your home. Black Hollow is. The bakery needs you. The bakery has Margaret and Sophie. Your sisters are useless," her father snapped. "They can't lift a damn flour sack between them. The business is falling apart. We need you back." One of the men with him, Clara didn't recognize him, spoke up. "Mr. Whitmore, maybe we should—" "Shut up." Abraham turned back to Clara. "I'm willing to pay your husband." Compensate him for the inconvenience. You'll come back, work the bakery for 2 years, then you can return here if you want. That's fair. Clara stared at him. You want to buy me back. I want to save my business, the business that kept a roof over your head for 24 years. The business I ran single-handedly while you and Mother pretended I didn't exist. Clara's voice was steady, but fury burned beneath it. I'm not coming back. I have a life here, a business of my own, a husband. A husband who chose you out of legal obligation, her father said cruelly. You think he actually wanted you? He needed a wife or he'd lose his land claim. Don't fool yourself into thinking this is real. The words hit like a slap, but Clara didn't flinch. She'd heard worse from him. She'd believed worse about herself for years. Get off my property, she said quietly. Your property? Abraham laughed. Girl, you don't own anything. This is his ranch. You're just... She said, get off our property. Everyone turned. Elias was walking up from the barn, leading his horse. He must have come back early and approached from the other side. His face was calm, but there was something dangerous in his eyes. Abraham straightened. Elias Mercer, I presume. I'm Abraham Whitmore, Clara's father. I'm here to make you a fair offer. I heard the offer. Answers no. You haven't even heard the amount. Don't care. Elias stopped beside Clara, close enough that she could feel the heat of him. Clara's not going anywhere. Now look here. Abraham's face reddened. That girl owes me. I raised her, fed her, gave her work when nobody else would touch her. You used her, Elias cut in, his voice cold. Used her labor, used her strength, and never gave her a damn thing in return. Not kindness, not respect, certainly not gratitude. So no, Mr. Whitmore, she doesn't owe you anything. This is ridiculous. Clara, tell him. I'm not going back, Clara said clearly. Ever. You need workers? Hire them. You need someone to run the bakery. Do it yourself. But I'm done. Abraham took a step forward, and Elias moved to block him. I think we're finished here, Elias said quietly. The threat in his voice was unmistakable. One of the other men, younger, looking uncomfortable, tugged Abraham's sleeve. Mr. Whitmore, we should go. This isn't... Fine. Abraham jerked away. But you'll regret this, Clara. When this ranch fails and you have nothing, don't come crawling back to me. I won't, Clara said. Abraham glared at her, then at Elias, then turned and stalked back to his horse. The other men followed, mounting quickly. Within minutes they were riding away, leaving dust hanging in the air. Clara stood frozen until they disappeared from view. Then her knees went weak. Elias caught her elbow. You all right? Clara's voice shook. Did he really just try to buy me back like livestock? Yeah, he did. And you? She looked up at Elias. You told him no. Of course I did, Elias frowned. Clara, did you think I'd actually consider that? I don't know. It was a lot of money and I'm... You're what? His voice sharpened. You're my wife. You're the person who kept this ranch running through winter. You're building a business people respect. You really think I'd sell you off like a damn horse? Clara's eyes burned. He said you only married me because of the law. He's an asshole trying to get under your skin. Elias's jaw tightened. I chose you, Clara. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. And if your father comes back here, I'll make damn sure he understands that. Something cracked open in Clara's chest. She'd heard Elias defend her before, but this was different. This was fierce and protective and absolute. Thank you, she whispered. Elias's expression softened. You don't have to thank me for keeping you safe. He paused. That's what you do for people you care about. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning neither was quite ready to name. Come on, Elias said finally. Let's get inside. You're shaking. He was right. Adrenaline was crashing through her system, making her hands tremble. She let him guide her inside, let him pour her coffee, let him sit across from her while she tried to process what had just happened. He's not coming back, is he? Clara asked after a while. Not if he's smart. Elias stirred his coffee. But if he does, I'll be here, and so will the rifle. Clara almost smiled at that. You'd shoot my father? Rather not, but I'd make him think I would. He looked at her seriously. Clara, you need to understand something. You're not that girl in Black Hollow anymore. You're not alone. You're not unprotected. Anyone who wants to hurt you goes through me first. Why? The question slipped out before Clara could stop it. Why do you care so much? Elias was quiet for a long moment. You really don't know? No, Clara's throat tightened. Nobody's ever cared before, not like this, so I don't understand why you would. Because Elias stopped, seemed to struggle with words, because when I look at you, I don't see someone who needs fixing or saving or changing. I see someone strong, someone who survived things that would have broken most people. Someone who makes this place feel like what? Like home, he said quietly. For the first time since Caroline died, this place feels like home, and that's because of you. Clara's vision blurred. She tried to blink the tears back, but they fell anyway. Elias reached across the table and took her hand. I meant what I said at the selection. I chose you, and I'd choose you again, every time. Clara held his hand like a lifeline, feeling the calluses, the warmth, the steady strength of him. And she realized that somewhere between winter and spring, between fever and fabric, they'd stopped being strangers playing at marriage. They'd become real. The next few days passed quietly. Clara threw herself into work, finishing the wedding dress and starting 2 new commissions. Elias worked the ranch, preparing for summer. They moved around each other with careful awareness, neither pushing, neither pulling away. But something had shifted. The careful distance they'd maintained was gone, burned away by her father's visit and Elias's fierce defense. Now there was just tension, not bad tension, the kind that made Clara's heart race when Elias walked into a room, the kind that made her hyper aware of every moment they were close. She caught him watching her sometimes, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. One evening in late April, Clara was working late in her sewing room when Elias knocked on the door frame. Getting late, he said, like he always did. I know, just finishing. Clara, he came closer. You've been avoiding me. She looked up, startled. What? No, I haven't. Yes, you have, ever since your father came. You barely look at me. You disappear into this room every chance you get. He leaned against the work table. Did I do something wrong? No, Clara set down her needle. You didn't do anything wrong. Then what's going on? Clara's hands twisted in her lap. This was it. The moment she either told the truth or kept hiding, and she was so tired of hiding. I'm scared, she said quietly. Of what? Of this, she gestured between them, of whatever this is becoming. Elias was silent for a moment. And what do you think it's becoming? I don't know. Something more than what we agreed to. Something that could hurt if it goes wrong. And if it goes right? Clara looked up at him. Does it go right for people like us? People like us? People who married out of obligation, who barely knew each other, who... She stopped. Who fell in love anyway? Elias finished quietly. Clara's heart stopped. What? Elias moved closer, crouching beside her chair, so they were eye level. I wasn't going to say anything. Figured you had enough to deal with without me complicating things. But if we're being honest... He took a breath. I care about you, Clara. More than I should. More than I planned to. And I think you feel the same way, but you're too scared to say it. Of course I'm scared, Clara whispered. Nobody's ever... I know. His voice was gentle. And I'm not rushing you. I'm telling you how I feel, so you know you're not alone in this. Clara's eyes burned. When did it happen? When did you... I don't know. Somewhere between you nursing me through fever and you standing up to your father. Somewhere between watching you build something from nothing and realizing you make me laugh again. He reached up and brushed a tear from her cheek. You brought this place back to life, Clara. You brought me back to life. How could I not fall in love with you? I'm not... Clara's voice broke. I'm not Caroline. No, you're not, and I'm not asking you to be. Elias held her gaze. I loved Caroline. I'll always love her, but she's gone. And you're here. And what I feel for you is, it's different, but it's real. Clara couldn't hold back any more. I love you too, she whispered. I think I have for months, but I didn't think you could. Elias kissed her. It was soft and careful and devastating. Clara froze for a heartbeat, then kissed him back, pouring everything she couldn't say into it. Years of loneliness, months of hope, the terrifying, exhilarating feeling of being seen and wanted and loved. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Elias rested his forehead against hers. You don't have to be scared, he said quietly. I've got you, okay? Okay, Clara whispered. They stayed like that for a long moment, wrapped around each other in the lamplight, everything finally clicking into place. 3 days later, Clara was hanging laundry when Ruth Hadley rode up with news. Have you heard about the Founders' Ball? Ruth asked, breathless with excitement. Clara shook her head. What ball? The territorial governor's throwing a huge celebration in Black Hollow next month. Biggest event the territory's ever seen. All the important families, politicians, merchants, everyone's going to be there. Ruth grinned. And he specifically requested that local artisans be invited to showcase their work. Clara, you could display your dresses, get real buyers. This is huge. Clara's stomach dropped. In Black Hollow. I know it's your hometown, but Ruth, I can't go back there. Not to a ball, not to the place that had humiliated her so thoroughly she'd tried to erase herself. Why not? Ruth frowned. Clara, you're not that girl anymore. You're a successful seamstress with a waiting list of clients. You'd be going as a respected artisan, not whatever they made you feel like before. They'll laugh. Let them try. You'll be there with your husband, wearing something you made yourself, representing a business they can't touch. Ruth leaned forward. Clara, this is your chance to show them exactly who you became without them. After Ruth left, Clara stood in the yard for a long time, staring at the laundry, flapping in the wind. Elias found her there an hour later. Ruth told me about the ball, he said. I can't go. You can, but I won't force you. He stood beside her. For what it's worth, though, I think you should. Not for them, for you. To prove to yourself that they don't have power over you anymore. What if I get there and what if I freeze up? What if I'm still that scared girl who... You're not that girl, Elias said firmly. You haven't been for a long time, and I'll be right beside you the whole night. Anyone looks at you wrong, they answer to me. Clara took a shaky breath. You really think I can do this? I know you can. He took her hand. You're the strongest person I know, Clara. You just haven't realized it yet. That night, Clara made a decision. She'd go to the ball. She'd wear something she made herself, and she'd show Black Hollow exactly what they'd thrown away. The next month was chaos. Clara worked on her dress in every spare moment, a deep blue silk she'd been saving for something special. The design was bold without being impractical, elegant without being fragile, the kind of dress that said she knew exactly who she was. Elias rode into town twice to arrange everything, secured their invitation, reserved a display space for Clara's work, made sure everyone knew Mrs. Clara Mercer would be attending. As the date approached, Clara's anxiety grew. She barely slept, barely ate, kept second-guessing every stitch in her dress. The night before they were supposed to leave, Elias found her in her sewing room, unpicking a seam for the third time. Clara, stop. It's not right. The shoulder's uneven. The shoulder's perfect. You're just panicking. He gently took the dress from her hands. Look at me. She did. You're going to walk into that ball tomorrow night, and you're going to be the most impressive person there. Not because of what you're wearing, though this dress is incredible, but because of who you are. Because you survived. Because you built something real. Because you're not afraid anymore. I am afraid, Clara whispered. Then be afraid, but go anyway. He cupped her face. I'll be right there the whole time, I promise. Clara leaned into his touch, drawing strength from him. What if they're cruel? Then I'll be crueler. Despite everything, Clara smiled. You can't fight the entire town. Watch me. He kissed her forehead. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Clara tried, but sleep was impossible. She lay in bed, their bed now, the small room abandoned, and stared at the ceiling, Elias's steady breathing beside her, trying to convince herself she could actually do this. They left at dawn, the wagon loaded with Clara's display pieces, 10 of her best dresses carefully packed. The ride to Black Hollow took 4 hours, and Clara's anxiety grew with every mile. By the time they reached the town, her hands were shaking. "Breathe," Elias said quietly, taking her hand. "You've got this." They checked into the boarding house, changed into their formal clothes, and headed to the town hall where the ball was being held. The building had been transformed. Lanterns hung everywhere, casting warm light across polished floors. Long tables displayed goods from local merchants and artisans. A small orchestra played in the corner. People in their finest clothes filled every inch of space. Clara stood in the doorway, frozen. Then Elias took her arm. "Come on, let's set up your display." Their table was near the center of the room, prime location. Clara arranged her dresses carefully, her hands moving on autopilot while her mind screamed that this was a mistake. Everyone was staring. They'd laugh any second now. But nobody laughed. People passed by, glancing at her work. A few stopped to look closer. One woman asked about pricing. Clara answered mechanically, her voice steadier than she felt. Then the crowd parted, and Judge Colton approached with the territorial governor, a tall man with graying hair and sharp eyes. "Mrs. Mercer," Judge Colton said, "Governor Morrison wanted to meet our local artisans." The governor studied Clara's display, picking up one dress and examining the seams. "This is exceptional work. Where did you train?" I'm self-taught, sir." "Remarkable." He set the dress down carefully. "We need more craftspeople like you in the territory. Quality work, practical design. This is exactly what frontier communities need." He moved on, and Clara stood there stunned. The territorial governor had complimented her work, actually complimented it. More people stopped by after that, asked questions, placed orders, commented on the quality. Clara's order book filled with names and requests. Then she heard a familiar laugh. Judith Brennan, the woman who'd mocked her in the square a year ago, was standing a few tables away, talking loudly to a group of women. Clara recognized some of them, her old neighbors, people who'd watched her get humiliated and done nothing. "Heard she married that cowboy out of desperation," Judith was saying. "Poor thing. Still trying to pretend she's something she's not." Clara's chest tightened. Here it was, the mockery she'd been waiting for. But before she could react, Elias appeared at her side. He didn't say anything, just stood there, solid and steady, his hand finding hers. Then Ruth's voice cut through the conversation. "Judith, have you actually seen Clara's work? It's better than anything you're wearing." Judith spun around, face reddening. "Excuse me." "No, really." Ruth gestured at Clara's display. "She's got commissions backed up for months. The governor himself complimented her. Meanwhile, you're standing here gossiping like it's still 10 years ago." She smiled sweetly. "Times change, Judith. Maybe you should too." A few people laughed, not at Clara this time, at Judith. Judith's face went scarlet. She opened her mouth, closed it, then turned and stalked away. Clara stood there, barely breathing, waiting for the world to collapse. Instead, a woman approached her table. Elegant, well-dressed, with kind eyes. "Mrs. Mercer, I'm Eleanor Hartwick. I own 3 dress shops in the Eastern Territories." She gestured at the dresses. "Your work is extraordinary. I'd like to discuss a potential partnership. Large-scale orders, exclusive designs. Would you be interested?" Clara's mind went blank. Yes, I would." "Excellent. Here's my card. Write to me next week and we'll discuss terms." Eleanor smiled. "You're going to go far, Mrs. Mercer." She walked away, and Clara just stood there, holding the card, feeling like reality had tilted sideways. Elias squeezed her hand. "See? Told you." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. More orders, more compliments, people treating her with respect, real respect, not pity or mockery. When the ball finally ended, Clara's order book was full, her display was nearly sold out, and she had a business card from a merchant who could change everything. They walked back to the boarding house in silence, Clara's mind spinning. Once they were in their room, door closed, Clara finally let herself feel it, the weight of everything, the validation, the proof that she'd been right to hope. "I did it," she whispered. "I actually did it." Elias pulled her close. "You did. And I'm so damn proud of you." Clara buried her face in his chest and let herself cry, not from sadness this time, but from relief and joy and the overwhelming feeling of finally being seen. They stayed in Black Hollow one more night, and Clara barely slept. Her mind kept replaying the ball, the governor's compliment, Eleanor Hartwick's offer, the way Judith Brennan had walked away humiliated instead of victorious. Every memory felt surreal, like it had happened to someone else. In the morning they loaded the wagon and headed home. Clara was quiet for the first hour, watching the landscape roll by, still processing everything. "You're thinking too loud," Elias said eventually. Clara glanced at him. "Sorry." "Don't be sorry, just talk to me." She was quiet for another moment, then said, "I keep waiting for it to fall apart, for someone to tell me it was all a mistake, that I didn't actually—" She stopped. "Didn't actually what?" "Didn't actually prove anything, that I'm still just—" She gestured vaguely at herself, "the girl nobody wanted." Elias pulled the wagon to a stop. They were on a stretch of empty road, nothing around but hills and sky. "Look at me," he said. Clara did. "You walked into that ball last night, and you didn't just prove something to them, you proved it to yourself, that you're not what they said you were, that you never were." He took her hand. "And I need you to understand something. You were never the girl nobody wanted. You were the girl they were too damn blind to see. There's a difference." Clara's eyes burned. "How do you always know what to say?" "I don't. Most of the time I'm terrible at this." He squeezed her hand. "But I know you, Clara, and I know you're still carrying around 10 years of their garbage in your head, so I'm going to keep reminding you it's garbage until you believe me. That might take a while. I've got time." He picked up the reins again. "We've got time." They reached the ranch by late afternoon. Clara climbed down from the wagon, her body aching from the ride, and looked at the house. Their house. The place she'd been terrified of a year ago, convinced it would just be another prison. Instead, it had become the first place she'd ever felt safe. Elias started unloading while Clara went inside to start dinner. She was stirring a pot on the stove when she heard more horses outside. She tensed, memories of her father's visit flooding back. But when she looked out the window, she saw Ruth's wagon, and behind it 2 more wagons she didn't recognize. Elias met them in the yard. Clara dried her hands and went outside, confused. Ruth was grinning. "Told everyone you'd be back today. Hope you don't mind visitors." Everyone turned out to be 6 women from neighboring ranches, all of them talking at once. "We heard about the ball. Ruth said the governor complimented your work. Is it true you got an offer from a merchant in the east?" Clara stood there overwhelmed until Ruth took charge. All right, give her some breathing room." Ruth shooed everyone toward the house. "Clara, these ladies all want to commission pieces. Figured we'd come together so you could take all the orders at once." For the next 2 hours, Clara's kitchen filled with women placing orders, discussing fabrics, sharing measurements. It was chaotic and loud and completely overwhelming. But it was also proof that what happened at the ball wasn't a fluke. Her work mattered. People wanted it. After everyone left, Clara sank into a chair, exhausted. Elias set a cup of coffee in front of her. "You all right?" "I don't know. I think so." She looked at her order book, now completely full. "This is more work than I can handle alone. So hire help. Ruth would work for you full-time if you asked." "I can't afford—" "Clara." Elias sat across from her. "You just got offered a partnership with a major merchant. You have more orders than you can fill. This isn't the bakery where you did everything for nothing. This is a real business. Start treating it like one." He was right. She knew he was right. But the idea of actually expanding, of treating this as something legitimate instead of just a hobby she happened to make money from, it felt dangerous. Like she was tempting fate, but maybe that was the point. Maybe growth was supposed to feel dangerous. "I'll talk to Ruth," Clara said finally. "Good," Elias stood. "Now come on, you've had a long couple days. Let's eat something that isn't road food." Summer arrived with heat that made the air shimmer and storms that rolled through the valley like freight trains. Clara hired Ruth full-time and brought in 2 other women part-time to help with simpler work. Her sewing room, the one Elias had built for her, became a proper workshop, with 3 sewing stations and fabric stacked to the ceiling. The partnership with Eleanor Hartwick went through. Clara signed contracts she barely understood, agreeing to provide exclusive designs for Eleanor's Eastern shops. The first payment arrived in July, more money than Clara had ever seen in her life. She stared at the bank draft for a full 5 minutes before Elias took it from her hands. "This is real," he said. "You did this. I don't know what to do with this much money. Save some. Invest some back in the business. Maybe fix that sagging porch." He smiled. "Or you could just sit with it for a while. Let yourself feel successful." That was the hard part. Feeling successful. Clara could acknowledge the facts, the orders, the money, the respect. But actually feeling like she deserved it, that was harder. Old habits died hard. She still woke up expecting to be yelled at, still flinched when she made mistakes, still waited for someone to tell her this was all temporary, that she'd eventually be revealed as a fraud. But Elias was patient. When she spiraled into self-doubt, he'd sit with her and methodically list everything she'd accomplished. When she worked herself into exhaustion, he'd physically remove the needle from her hands and make her rest. When she apologized for taking up space, he'd remind her that this was her house too, her business, her life. Slowly, painfully slowly, Clara started to believe him. One August evening, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset when Elias said, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "Your father, the way he tried to buy you back." Elias was quiet for a moment. "I never asked if you wanted revenge. If you wanted to, I don't know, show him what he lost. Rub his face in your success." Clara considered that. A year ago, she would have said yes immediately. Would have wanted nothing more than to make her father regret every cruel word, every dismissal, every moment he treated her like a burden. But now, "No," she said finally. "I don't need that." "You sure?" "Yeah." Clara watched the sky turn gold and orange. "He doesn't get to matter anymore. He spent years making me feel worthless and I let him, but that's done. He's not part of my life now, and I'm not going to give him space in my head by trying to prove something to him." Elias nodded slowly. That's really healthy, actually," Clara laughed. "Don't sound so surprised." "I'm not, just proud of you." He took her hand. "A lot of people never get past needing their parents' approval, even when those parents don't deserve it. I spent 10 years trying to earn approval that was never coming. I'm not wasting another 10 on revenge." She squeezed his hand. "I'd rather spend that time building something real with you." Elias pulled her closer, and they sat like that until the stars came out, wrapped around each other, the ranch quiet around them. In September, Margaret showed up. Clara was working in her shop when Ruth came in, looking uncomfortable. "You've got a visitor, your sister." Clara's hands stilled on the fabric she'd been cutting. "Which one?" "Margaret, she looks rough." Clara set down her shears and went outside. Margaret was standing by the porch, looking nothing like the polished girl Clara remembered. Her dress was worn. Her hair was tangled. She had bruises on her wrists that her sleeves didn't quite cover. "Clara," Margaret said, her voice small. Clara crossed her arms. "What are you doing here? I need help." Margaret's voice cracked. "My husband, he's not what I thought. He drinks, gets angry. I don't know where else to go." Every instinct Clara had screamed at her to turn Margaret away, to remember all the times Margaret had stood by and watched, while their father mocked her. all the times Margaret had accepted kindness and comfort that Clara had been denied. But Clara also remembered what it felt like to be trapped, to have nowhere to go and nobody to help. "Come inside," Clara said. Margaret followed her in, moving carefully, like someone used to avoiding sudden movements. Clara made tea while Margaret sat at the table, hands wrapped around herself. "Father won't take me back," Margaret said quietly. "I tried, but he says I made my choice and I have to live with it. Sophie won't answer my letters. I didn't know where else." She looked up, tears streaming down her face. "I know I don't deserve your help. I know I was terrible to you, but please, I'm desperate." Clara set a cup of tea in front of her. "You can stay, for now. We'll figure out the rest later." "Thank you," Margaret whispered. "Thank you." Elias came in later and Clara pulled him aside, explaining the situation. "You sure about this?" he asked quietly. "No, but I can't," Clara struggled for words. "I can't be like them, like father, turning someone away when they need help just because I'm angry at them." "You're allowed to be angry." "I am angry, but I'm also," she sighed, "I'm also the only person who understands what it's like to be trapped with nowhere to go. And I won't do to her what everyone did to me." Elias studied her face. "You're a better person than most, you know that?" "I'm just trying to be decent. That's what I said, better than most." He kissed her forehead. "All right, but if she causes problems, she leaves. Agreed?" "Agreed." Margaret stayed in the small room, the one that had been Elias's, then empty, then a storage space. She was quiet, almost invisible, helping with chores without being asked, keeping out of the way. After a week, Clara sat down with her. "We need to talk," Clara said. Margaret looked terrified. "Are you sending me away?" "No, but I need to understand what you want. Are you staying permanently? Going back to your husband? What's the plan?" Margaret was quiet for a long time. "I don't know. I can't go back to him. I know that, but I don't know what comes next." "Do you have any skills? Anything you're good at?" Margaret looked ashamed. "Not really. Father always said I was too pretty to need skills, that I'd just marry well and be taken care of." Clara felt a flash of anger, not at Margaret, but at their father, at the system that taught women they only needed to be pretty, then abandoned them when pretty wasn't enough. "You can sew?" Clara asked. "Basic stuff? Mending? Nothing like what you do." "That's fine. I need help with simple work. Hemming, finishing seams, basic repairs." Clara leaned forward. "I'll pay you. Not much at first, but enough that you can save money, build independence, and when you're ready you can decide what comes next." Margaret stared at her. "Why would you help me like this after everything?" "Because someone helped me when I had nothing, and because you're my sister, whether we like each other or not." Clara stood. "But Margaret, I need you to understand something. This isn't charity. If you work for me, I expect you to actually work. No disappearing when things get hard. No expecting special treatment because we're family. You pull your weight or you leave. Clear?" "Clear," Margaret whispered. "And Clara, I'm sorry for all of it, for never standing up for you. You deserved better." Clara's throat tightened. "Yeah, I did, but thank you for saying it." Margaret proved herself over the next few months. She was slow at first, clumsy with needle and thread, but she learned. More importantly, she was reliable. She showed up every day, worked her hours, and slowly started rebuilding herself into someone who didn't need to be pretty to have value. One evening, Clara found her crying over a torn seam. "I can't get it right," Margaret said, frustrated. "I've redone it 3 times and it's still crooked." Clara sat beside her. "It's not about getting it perfect, it's about getting it better than last time. You'll mess up 1,000 times before you get good at this. That's just how it works. You make it look easy." "Because I've been doing it for 15 years. You've been doing it for 3 months. Clara took the fabric and showed her the proper angle. "See? Like this. Try again." Margaret tried again. Got it a little better. "There," Clara said. "Progress." "How did you do it?" Margaret asked quietly. How did you survive all those years at the bakery, all that treatment? How did you not give up? Clara was quiet for a moment. Honestly, I did give up. Multiple times. I stopped believing I deserved anything good. Stopped hoping things would change. She looked at Margaret. But then I got forced into something I didn't want, and it turned out to be exactly what I needed. Sometimes you survive just by accident, by being too stubborn to quit, by finding one person who sees you differently than everyone else. Elias, Margaret said. Yeah, Elias. Clara smiled. He saw me when I was still invisible, before I knew how to see myself. You're lucky to have him. I know. But luck only got me here. Everything after that, the business, the confidence, the life, I had to build that myself. Clara handed the fabric back. And you can too. You just have to decide you're worth the effort. By October, Clara's business had grown so much that the small workshop wasn't enough. She and Elias talked about building an addition, but the costs were steep and the timing was uncertain. Then Eleanor Hartwick wrote with another offer. She wanted Clara to open an official shop in Black Hollow, a full storefront with Clara's name on it, backed by Eleanor's business connections but owned by Clara herself. Clara read the letter 3 times, then handed it to Elias. That's a lot, he said. I can't run a shop in Black Hollow. I'm here. You could hire someone to manage it. Go in once a week to oversee things. Elias set the letter down. Clara, this is the kind of opportunity that doesn't come twice. If you want to build something really big, something that lasts, this is how you do it. Clara thought about it for days, talked to Ruth, talked to Margaret, talked to herself late at night when she couldn't sleep. Finally, she wrote back to Eleanor. Yes, she'd do it. The shop opened in November, right on Black Hollow's main street. Clara hired a manager, a capable woman named Dorothy who'd worked in retail for years. Margaret asked if she could help run it, and Clara, after careful consideration, said yes. But you report to Dorothy, Clara made clear, and if you cause problems, you're out, family or not. I understand, Margaret said. And Clara, thank you for giving me a chance I didn't earn. You're earning it now. Don't waste it. The shop was successful from the start. Women came from across the territory to buy Clara's designs. The name on the sign, Clara Mercer, dressmaker, became synonymous with quality and practicality. And every time Clara rode into town and saw that sign, something inside her healed a little more. Winter came again, but this time Clara wasn't hauling flour or hiding in a bakery or wishing she could disappear. She was running a business, employing people, making decisions that mattered. She stood in her workshop one December afternoon, surrounded by fabric and half-finished dresses, and realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd felt ashamed of her body, couldn't remember the last time she'd thought of herself as ugly or worthless or broken. Somewhere along the way, she'd stopped believing the lies. Elias found her there, standing in the middle of the room, tears streaming down her face. What's wrong? He asked, alarmed. Nothing. Clara laughed through the tears. Nothing's wrong. I just realized I'm happy, actually happy, and I don't know what to do with that. Elias pulled her close. You accept it. You let yourself have it. What if it goes away? Then we'll deal with it together. He held her tighter. But Clara, you've earned this. The happiness, the success, all of it. Stop waiting for permission to enjoy your own life. Clara buried her face in his shoulder and let herself feel it, all of it. The joy and the fear and the overwhelming gratitude that she'd survived long enough to see this version of herself. The version that wasn't invisible, the version that mattered. Christmas came, and this time they celebrated properly. Clara invited everyone, Ruth and her family, Margaret, Dorothy, the woman who worked in her shop, the neighbors who'd become friends. The house filled with people and laughter and warmth. Clara stood in the kitchen watching everyone, and Elias came up behind her. You did this, he said quietly. Built this whole life from nothing. We did this. No, I gave you a place to land, but you're the one who learned to fly. Clara turned in his arms. I love you. Did I mention that today? Only twice, falling behind. She laughed and kissed him, and somewhere in that moment Clara realized this was it. This was the life she dreamed about when she was 14 and sketching dresses in secret, when she was 24 and kneading bread with bleeding hands, when she was standing in a selection line convinced nobody would ever want her. She'd found it, not by changing who she was, but by finding people who saw her as she actually was, not by becoming smaller or prettier or more acceptable, but by taking up space and refusing to apologize for it. The frontier had tried to break her. Her family had tried to erase her. The world had tried to convince her she was worthless. But she'd survived. More than survived. She'd thrived, and that was worth more than any blue ribbon or judge's approval or father's validation. That was everything. That evening, after everyone left and the house was quiet again, Clara and Elias sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, watching snow fall across the valley. Do you ever regret it? Clara asked, choosing me that day. Elias was quiet for a moment. I regret that we had to meet that way, that you were put in that position, that anyone thought it was acceptable to treat women like property. He squeezed her hand. But do I regret choosing you specifically? Not for a second. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. Even better than your first wife. Different than Caroline, not better or worse. Different. He looked at her. Caroline and I had a good life, but it was simple, easy. We loved each other, but we never really challenged each other. With you, he smiled, with you everything's harder, but it matters more. You make me want to be better. You make me think about things I never considered. I what? You make me feel alive, he said simply. For 5 years I was just existing, going through the motions. Then you showed up and suddenly I had a reason to care again. Clara's eyes burned. I was so scared when I met you, convinced you'd realize you made a mistake and send me back. I knew within a week I wasn't sending you anywhere, really. You hauled water without complaining, fixed the fence before I asked, made curtains because you thought the kitchen needed them. He laughed, and you looked at me like I was a person, not a hero or a savior or someone you had to impress, just a person. I hadn't had that in years. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, snow dusting the ground, the world quiet and perfect. I was thinking, Elias said eventually, maybe we should talk about the future, real future, not just the business. Clara's heart skipped. What kind of future? The kind with kids if you want them, or not if you don't. The kind where we're still sitting here in 30 years, annoying each other and running this ranch into the ground because we're too stubborn to retire. He turned to face her. The kind where I get to spend the rest of my life with you. Clara couldn't speak for a moment. Then she said, yes, all of that, whatever comes. Yeah. She kissed him. I spent 24 years being told what my life should look like. I'm done with that. I want to figure out the rest with you, however it looks. Elias pulled her closer. We're going to be okay, you know that. Whatever happens, we've survived everything else. We can survive the future too. And Clara believed him, not because the future would be easy. It wouldn't be. Not because they wouldn't face challenges or heartbreak or moments of doubt. They would. But because they'd learned something most people never figured out. That strength wasn't about being perfect or pretty or acceptable. It was about surviving the things that tried to break you and coming out the other side still willing to hope. It was about finding someone who saw you, really saw you, and choosing to see them back. It was about taking all the garbage the world piled on you and building something beautiful anyway. Clara had spent years being invisible, being the burden, being the girl nobody wanted. But she wasn't that girl anymore. She was Clara Mercer, seamstress, business owner, wife, survivor. She was exactly who she was supposed to be, and that finally, beautifully, impossibly, was enough. The snow kept falling.